So let's now look at getting our profile data from the API, and there's a few things we're going to need in this case. And first of all, let's create a new model or a new interface for the profiles that we're getting back from the server. So I'm just going to create a new file and call it profile.ts inside the models folder. And let's export an interface called iProfile. And this is going to have just the same content that we're returning from our server for the profiles. So that's going to be the display name, the username, both strings, and the bio as a string, and the image, which is going to be a string, and then the photos, which is going to be of type iPhoto array. And we need to create the interface, and sadly no code actions available, so we're going to have to type this in manually. So we'll say export interface, and we'll call this iPhoto, and we'll set the ID equal to a string, the URL as a string, and just whether or not the photo is the main photo, which of course is a Boolean. And with our interfaces in place, let's go to our agent next, and let's create the method we need to go and get a profile. So just scroll on down, and what we'll do here is we'll create a new object for our profile related request. So I'll say const profiles equals, and what we'll do in here is we'll just create a get method to go and get a user's profile, and this is going to take a username as a parameter, which of course is a type of string, and we'll add a return type here as well, because this is going to return a promise of type iProfile, and we'll just need to bring the iProfile in as well. So let's bring that in, and what we'll do is we'll say requests.get, and what we want to do here is add the backticks and then say profile, or in this case actually on our server, because we're going to hit our profiles controller endpoints, this has to be profiles. Now in our agent.ts file, it's important to be careful here because we don't get any type safety for our API endpoint URLs, so we do need to be accurate with this, otherwise we'll run into problems. And what we'll do in this case, we'll hit our profiles pluralized, and we'll say / and then $, and then username. And it should be requests.get, not request.get. So this is the method we need to go and get our user profile. We'll also need to export our profiles object here as well. And what we'll do from here is we'll create a new profile store to manage everything to do with our profiles. So we'll just go back to Explorer, and inside the app folder, inside the stores folder, we'll just create a new file. And we'll call this profile store.ts. And this is going to be very similar process to what we did with our others. So I'm going to say export default class and profile store. And let's add a property for our root store of type root store. And this never imports automatically. So I'll just import the root store from / root store, and then I'll add the constructor and pass in the root store of type root store, and then I'll say this dot root store equals root store, and then I'll do the other side of this and just open up the root store, and we'll add the profile store of type profile store, and it's going to make me import this manually, so import profile store from profile store, and then we can just add this as well to our list and say new profile store and pass in lists as well. So now we've got our setup taken care of, let's go to our profile store, and we'll need a couple of observables to start with, and we'll have an observable called profile, and this is going to be of type iProfile, or it's going to be null, and we'll set it equal to null initially. And let's add another observable so that we can add a loading indicator, and I'll just say loading profile equals, and we'll set this to false initially. And then we just need our action to load the profile, so I'll say action load profile, and we'll make this an async action, and we'll pass in the username of type string into this, and we just need to add the action as into our imports from MobX. And let's set the loading flag to true, so I'll say list loading profile equals true, and then we'll add the try catch block. And in the try, what we'll do, we'll say const profile equals await agent dot profiles dot get, and pass in the username as the parameter. And then, because we're going to manipulate observables after an await operation, we need to run this inside an action. So we'll say run in action, and then inside here we'll say list.profile equals profile, and we'll say list.loading profile equals false. And inside the catch block, again, we'll need to run this inside an action as well, and we'll set the loading profile equal to false, and in this case we'll just add a console.log and add an error. So with all of this in place, let's head over to our profile page, and we'll just bring in our new profile store. And just as we've done before, let's add a const for the root store, and we'll set this equal to use context, and we'll pass in the root store context, and then we'll say we'll destructure what we're going to get from the root store dot profile store, and in this case what we need is the loading profile and the profile, and we also want to bring in the load profile as well here, because when we access this page we want to go out and actually load our profile, and we're going to do that inside a use effect. So let's add a little bit of space, and I'll say use effect, and we want to bring this in from React, and we've used this before so there's nothing new going on here, and what we want to do inside this effect is literally just load up our profile. So I'll say load profile, but then we're faced with, well, where do we get our username from? And of course this is coming from our root parameters. So this means we're going to need to make use of our root component props and make use of the match so that we can get access to our username. So what we'll need to do, we'll need to create an interface for the root params and set the username here equal to a string, and then we'll need another interface called iProps, which extends the root component props, and then we need to pass in our root params, and then we can set these in our profile page. So we'll set this to react.fc and pass in iProps, and then we should have access to our root properties, and the one we want from here is the match property. So our load profile, we'll set this parameter to match.params.username, and in the dependencies for the use effect we'll need both the load profile and we'll need to pass in match as well. And what we also want to do is, if we're loading our profile, we want to show our loading component. So I'm going to say if loading profile, then return our loading components, and for the content here I'll just set this equal to loading profile ... and then we can pass our profile to our profile header. So I'll pass the profile equal to profile, and of course our profile header is complaining because it doesn't know about this. So let's head over to our profile header, and what we'll do is we'll create yet another interface for iProps called iProps, and we'll set the profile equal to a type of iProfile. And then once again we'll use the react.fc and pass in iProps, and then we can just destructure the profile and make use of this inside our header. So we've got an image, and this is going to be the user's profile image, so we'll set this to profile.image, or it's going to be set to the user.png, and then we've got our display name, which we can set to profile.displayname, and the rest of it doesn't change at all at the moment. And we can see we've got an error here, so let's take a look at what this is, and it tells us that the type of iProfile or null is not assignable to type profile. So let's take a look, and this is in our profile page, and because profile can possibly be null, then TypeScript is complaining, and what we'll do is just bypass that with the exclamation mark to say that we know what we're doing, and because we're using the load profile here, we know better than TypeScript that by the time this is loaded, then we'll have something inside the profile. And of course, because we're observing observables from our profile store, we also need to make our profile page an observer of our store. So let's bring in the import for list from mobx React Lite and just wrap this around our profile page, or pass our profile page in as a parameter to this higher order component to be more accurate. And we'll also need to do the same with our profile header as well. So let's also make this an observer and bring that in from mobx and just add parentheses around the profile header. So let's take a look and see how we're doing. And let's just refresh this page. And we're getting the fact that we cannot read property image of null. But what's going on here is because in our profile store, we're initializing our profile with null, and our loading profile is set to false, and this is the initial state of our component. So because our loading profile initially is set to false, and when our component first loads, this is immediately set to false, then we don't return our loading component, and instead we're returning this JSX, which includes our profile, which also includes the profile.image, and that's what we're having an issue with. So what we could do is in our profile store is, instead of initializing this with false, we can set it to true, and then we don't need to worry about this .loading profile being true, and we just turn it off after we've received our profile. Then what we should find is if we go back and take a look, we can now load our profile, and if I take a look at my profile, we see Bob's profile, and if I go back to the activities and click on any other profile, then we see Jane's profile there, but we do want to turn back on that loading indicator actually. Otherwise, if we do move between profiles, we don't see the loading indicator. So let's just go back and make sure nothing's broken, and I'll just go back to my profile again. We see the loading profile, and let's just make sure I can click on somebody else's, and I'll go back to Tom's, and let's make sure we can refresh, and we see the loading indicators and we see the profile as well. So that resolves that little problem.